Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Space seemed as monotonous as ever, the same stars and planets in that view so dull to the eyes of the three. They had been there for at least 7 hours, and remained restless, eager to go home. They always imagined seeing their replacements arrive soon. The replacements would usually appear slowly, emerging from the atmosphere almost as if on purpose to stretch out those paid hours, making those waiting for them sigh in frustration. They occasionally glanced at the orbit of their greenish planet, expecting that typical ship, identical to theirs, to show up and take their place. Thus, they alternated their gaze between where their colleagues should be coming from and the view on the opposite side, toward distant galaxies. They hoped that by some miracle they might spot something different, until finally something surely caught their attention in a rather peculiar, perhaps even historic way. That something could be a human ship? The one sitting in the middle pondered, squinting his eyes through the main display, while at the same time automatically keeping his hands on the controls, ensuring perfect handling of the spacecraft. The one standing beside him lifted his hands off the back of his companion's chair.
"No way! What is that, Niverick?"
Niverick stayed silent briefly, until his squinting eyes fully opened again. He nodded as he spoke.
No doubt about it. From its design, it looks very much like the ships the Terrans use.
The other leaned in closer to the display, trying harder to see. Niverick glanced to the side at his friend's naive gesture and activated the screen's built-in zoom. The image began to enlarge, causing his companion to jump slightly backward.
Oh, incredible!"
he said, mouth agape.
Surprised, Kozark?
Niverick asked.
"I even forgot that Zoom existed,"
he replied, wide-eyed. A somewhat thinner voice than the other two could be heard from behind them.
"It hasn't been used for at least 1,195 days and 3 hours.
That voice came from a being as gray in appearance as the other two, but fatter and wearing glasses. Alongside him there was always the continuous sound of something being chewed, something equivalent to snacks. They were so used to that sound almost all day long that it now seemed to naturally blend into the scene.
"See that?"
Korzak replied and continued as if not waiting to ask the next question.
"But how many years is that exactly, Harrog?"
"Just over 3 years," he replied, examining the lost snacks he had left, reaching deep into the package to gather what remained and tossing it into his mouth.
"But it's also a good idea to run a scan. It's essential to confirm if it's really what you think it is,"
he said, chewing. As he finished and saw the empty package, he let out a long sigh. Niverick began typing a few commands into his touchpad, until the enlarged image shifted into an X-ray view. Now they could perfectly see inside the spacecraft they were observing, with the glow of its gravitational engine behind it. Right in front of them, a silhouette revealed itself, which really seemed humanoid. Upon seeing this, they began to grow slightly agitated.
"But what are they even doing here?"
Kozark raised his eyebrows, keeping his eyes glued to what the scan was showing.
Well, we're about to find out.
After some commands on the touchpad, Niverick saw a green horizontal line appear on the display. The signal stood out against the mostly black space, with stars and galaxy far behind, while the spaceship they were watching continued its path. He monitored the trajectory the object seemed to be taking, analyzing where it had been before, and the direction the ship was now pointing, according to that virtual line that traced its course.
If it's been traveling in a straight line on an optimized route, it likely came from galaxy X3151 and is now heading toward the Milky Way.
Kozark slowly began to frown.
"X3151? Are you sure, Niverick?"
Yes, of course. Why?
"It's where I was born."
And he suddenly fell silent. Niverick, noticing the unusual pause, raised his eyebrow and turned to his companion.
And what about it?
A lot. It's not like it's common to see them. Even less to know that they're now returning to visit my old home.
Visit? Anyway, it doesn't matter where they're going. Humans are known as pacifists. There hasn't been any galactic war they've gotten involved in for many decades,
he said, turning his attention back to controlling the spaceship. Kozark stared at him with wide eyes.
Really? And what if they're just pretending to be pacifists? And what about our job?
Our job? Well, we're already here. What do you mean?
Kozark suddenly leaned forward, forcefully pressing one of the touchpads Nivrik had been managing.
Hey, that's the button for the...
Then the sound of something powering up began to fill their ears, followed by a bright light at the front, which gradually intensified until it abruptly burst in a peak of energy, causing the ship to tremble slightly. In front of them, a large bluish laser was fired continuously in a long beam, streaking across the vacuum of space. It traveled toward the modest, distant ship, which appeared as nothing more than a small dot lost in the distance. The vertical line of the energy shot was drawn toward it. It didn't take long to cross that vast space, almost hitting the target with a margin of just 100 meters, despite the great distance between them and the target. After the ship cooled down again from the shot, they felt a chill seeing it used like that after such a long, peaceful period. The one at the back got up from his chair, adjusting his glasses as he watched the ship they were observing now begin to accelerate faster than it had been. Its gravitational engine glowed even brighter. Nivrik slammed the panel in front of him with his hand.
"Look what you did!"
he shouted, his mouth wide open and full of spit. His eyes were bulging.
Our job!
Kozark shot back.
"But you fired at them! You're doing everything wrong!"
What difference does it make? I didn't even hit them!
He said through gritted teeth, stomping his foot.
"What difference does it make?"
Nivrik turned his attention back to the screen, trying to steady his breathing.
"Just wait until the Emperor finds out we made such a rash move without even contacting him first."
A brief silence fell over the room. Kozark's voice softened.
Nothing ever happens out here, and there's still an hour left in our shift. How are we supposed to always live like this?
Harrog pointed to the Terran ship, now getting farther away.
Well, now it's fleeing. You'd better hurry.
Kozark scratched his head as he looked back.
Hurry how?
Nivrik let out a long sigh amid the sound of various commands being entered on his touchpad. Harrog added in a monotone voice,
If they haven't already notified their compatriots, it's only a matter of time before this is seen as an act of war. We need to stop them before they reach their planet, or it might be too late. And they still call them pacifists?
Kozark said, narrowing his eyes. Nivrik suddenly sped up the ship. They watched the stars and space around them start to stretch on the screen. The chase to prevent a potential catastrophe had begun. Humans had always been known as diplomats. Because of this, almost no other civilization was certain about their technological capabilities in terms of warfare. There had never been an opportunity for them to show it in the last few years. However, considering the history of the last ancient conflicts, the chance of humans winning a direct battle against the people of Lasnor was less than 3%. Now it shouldn't be too different. The bigger issue was that the Lasnor Emperor was different from his Ovshirion neighbors. He commanded a nation known for taking steps far removed from his barbaric counterparts. Lasnor had power, but it was his remarkable sense of timing when initiating conflicts in the right time that set him apart. Their caution and planning were masterful. He was a strong candidate to take leadership among the Virkans. His military, technological, and economic growth had been astonishing in recent years compared to the others. If they maintained their position and philosophy, Lasnor would be the one to lift his people from the state of misery after having once been just a colony of their rivals. Much had changed after gaining independence. The history of their empire was still being written. Olivier Garcia, human, 45 minutes ago until the chase. The ship was of considerable size. While it wasn't as sophisticated as a military-grade ship, it was large enough to have a dedicated storage capability and also featured a launch platform. While it behaved like a miniature mothership, it didn't have the same complexity and was more akin to a simple truck. Its technical components were properly insulated and compact, meaning its size was not proportional to its power. In its main storage compartment, directly in front and connected to the control area without any separation for practical design optimization, there was a probe. Sitting in a chair in that zero-gravity room, with some tools in hand, he was performing meticulous maintenance on the object like a surgery while the ship floated in space, flying leisurely. Surrounding him were various parts. Most were charred or melted, and he slowly removed one after another, discarding them as they accumulated. With a few tools in hand, it was as if he were diving deeper into a cut, manipulating tissue he was trying to heal from a disease that had penetrated it.
"How did they find you?"
he pondered. He then repeatedly picked up another piece of protective covering, this one with its surface entirely melted, and sighed.
"What are the chances of hitting something that's camouflaged in all this darkness? The size is so immense that if they discovered it purely by accident, or perhaps through an unrelenting and illogical brute force, it would take trillions of years to hit a shot."
He then looked at the floor below, resting one hand on his thigh and slightly bending his body. He took a deep breath, trying not to close his eyes, which were dark with circles. He paused for a few seconds before suddenly widening his eyes. He lifted his head and returned to normal, as if he had plunged an invisible needle into himself.
"It shouldn't even be me doing this."
He made some quick, forceful movements with his tools until he finally heard a snap. He placed his hand deeper into that wound and emerged with a small, dark piece featuring silver details. He raised an eyebrow.
"My God, finally!"
he said, standing up from the chair, stretching his arms and elongating his back. He scratched his head and took slow steps to the control panel, then placed the piece on top of a compartment. It was like a small empty table dedicated solely to placing that item. He entered some commands on the analog buttons. A very thin laser began to emerge from something above the table, slowly filling every inch of the item from side to side. On a monitor in front of him, countless lines of information started to appear. He settled back into his chair, waiting for them to load. He allowed his muscles to relax, entered a few commands, and finalized by pressing a button. He rested the back of his head in his hands. At the signal of the button being pressed, the space outside the area remained a complete void. You could see the entire expanse of the universe in every direction, but no ships. However, suddenly something began to vibrate within that vacuum, obscuring the stars behind it, as if it were being rendered all at once, like a delayed object popping up due to a glitch. The ship emerged from the darkness as if it had been hidden by an invisible cloak.
"I still don't understand how they found it,"
he thought to himself, with the image of the probe in its current state still in his mind. The ship then sped off at high velocity, in stark contrast to its previously almost motionless drift. The journey continued on autopilot while the man lay back in his reclined chair. His snoring could be heard alongside the hum of his machines. After a few minutes, the loading bar on the monitor filled up, followed by a message as the fine laser stopped working. Data transferred to local storage. The completion beep didn't provoke the slightest change in the man's behavior, whose open mouth now let a small line of drool escape. The longer the minutes passed, the more his posture relaxed to the point he was almost falling out of his chair, until finally something happened that served as the worst alarm clock he could imagine. A wave of heat, accompanied by a flash of light, passed close to his spaceship, startling him awake with a jolt. He braced himself on the arms of the chair, looking around with wide eyes through the curved visor, noticing the light that had just passed him now continuing far ahead. He imagined what state he'd be in if it had hit him directly. However, he could see small fragments of the spaceship disintegrating like flakes of skin being scratched off. He immediately started inputting some commands, and a lens located at the top of the spaceship began to zoom in. The entire surrounding area now appeared on the visor, allowing for 360-degree navigation, while an artificial intelligence scanned the entire area, identifying and checking if everything matched the known parameters until it detected a significant discrepancy. There was an unusual movement behind him, different from the speed of any celestial body he knew. Within a few minutes, the AI's suggestion indicated it was a spaceship, and considering its trajectory towards his, along with the fact that the flash had come from the same direction, the conclusion was now obvious. Threat detected. Full power usage automatically activated. The standard speed at which he was traveling now increased. A blue, incomplete circle on the display showed 60%, quickly filling up to 100%. Maximum power. Now, with his hands on the ship's manual controls, the autopilot had been deactivated. It was excellent for travel, but not for moments like this. Precision and human experience were needed more than ever. Oliver's breathing was shallow, imagining when they would launch the next attack, or worse, when they would finally catch up to him.
It must be a military ship. How can I compete?
He thought to himself, remembering he had never been in a situation like this before, despite being an excellent pilot. He tried to control his breathing, then gave an order to his artificial intelligence.
How much time do I have left?
Considering the current speed is 7 times faster than the user's ship, the encounter will occur in approximately 15 minutes. He swallowed hard. His thoughts were now focused on how unlikely it was for this to have happened. He didn't recall any human conflicts in decades. His hands trembled as he gripped the manual controls, wondering if this was his last moment, or if he would ever see his family again.
The odds are slim, but...
He thought, but saw no other option. He spoke aloud.
Any asteroid belts nearby?
No collision risks.
Then look for one.
As an AI model designed to protect the user, I cannot comply with placing a human life in danger.
Do it or let me die!
Request accepted. Initiating asteroid belt scan. As he held tightly to the ship's manual controls, the lens on the upper part of the ship zoomed in again. It scanned the area for any detectable patterns, even at a great distance. After finding what seemed to be an asteroid belt, the automatic controls were temporarily activated, guiding the ship until it was close to the belt, completing the request. Position successfully achieved. Oliver gripped the ship's joystick tightly, his eyes unblinking as the asteroids loomed closer.
Come on, I need a miracle here,
he said, decisively maneuvering the ship through the belt in a risky move, hoping his pursuers would give up. When his AI indicated they had also entered the belt, it signaled, 7 minutes until the encounter. Distance very close. Risk of offensive measures is exceedingly high.
Shit!
Just as Oliver finished his thought, another bright flash passed beside him, colliding with an asteroid that disintegrated completely. He stared in disbelief.
I can't just leave the probe and the information behind.
He flew deeper into the asteroid field, hoping against hope that one of those gigantic rocks would miraculously collide with his pursuer. But as more time passed, the warnings continued. 5 minutes until the encounter. Risk of offensive measures is exceedingly high. As soon as he heard that, another flash grazed the top of his spacecraft. This time, he felt the heat more intensely than before. Detection lens destroyed.
Seriously?
He muttered, his voice trembling. Oliver made a sharp turn to change direction, glancing to the side in his curved display, hoping to catch sight of the pursuing ship. At this distance, he thought he might finally see it up close. When he spotted it, he could hardly believe his eyes. It was unmistakably an alien ship. Its sophisticated architecture made it clear that it was of a military kind, and it executed precise maneuvers through the asteroids, weaving in a perfect zigzag. Oliver had been a pilot for years, but even among humans, he had never seen anything like it. Someone exceptionally skilled was at the controls, and he cursed his terrible luck for having crossed paths with them. He saw a glow start to build up at the front of the spacecraft, intensifying until it suddenly burst in his direction. As the laser came toward him, everything around him seemed to slow down. Without thinking twice, he turned to his display, the vastness of space and galaxies visible all around him. He slammed his hand down hard on a button, and in an instant, everything around him vanished. The surveillance trio, 10 minutes until the encounter. As Niverick watched the human ship make that risky maneuver, diving into the dense asteroid belt, he raised an eyebrow. His eyes gleamed with excitement, and he immediately pushed the throttle to maximum, eager to get an even closer look at what the human was attempting. He felt energy surge through his body, gripping the joystick tightly. His ship tore through space, leaving a trail of light from the gravitational engine. He performed a slow curve to the right, climbing higher before suddenly dropping, using the pull of gravity to dive through a narrow gap between the rocks with pinpoint precision.
"Show me what you got!"
Niverick roared. Kozark's eyes widened. He glanced over at Harrog, who had the same expression. Harrog nodded, pointing a finger at him.
"He's really taking this seriously."
Kozark grabbed onto his seat firmly, growing more absorbed in what was unfolding in front of him. The two were positioned on opposite sides of the central control panel, with Niverick in the middle. Each had a specialized role. Niverick piloted the ship, Kozark managed additional offensive capabilities, and Harrog handled the technical details. Although Niverick had access to the weapons, Kozark was in charge of lateral firepower, ensuring an extra layer of defense or attack as needed. Harrog was tasked with feeding the ship's AI inputs and managing technical factors. They didn't expect to need all this against a mere human, but the hazardous environment posed a significant risk. Harrog began typing rapidly on his touchpad, and an image appeared on the main screen. The large, curved display was shared by all three, but it was expansive enough to ensure no one's view was compromised. It felt as though they were sharing the same monitor, but each with access to their own computer systems. The images contrasted sharply against the cosmic backdrop. On Harrog's section of the screen, a detailed map of the asteroid field was rendered, calculating the optimal trajectory for Niverick to follow. This valuable assistance allowed the pilot to navigate more effectively. Thanks to Harrog's data, Niverick guided the ship with terrifying precision. Augmented reality markers, fed by Harrog's inputs, created a green path that Niverick simply had to follow. It wasn't easy, but the constant support significantly reduced the chances of collision. The rocks blurred past the ship's sides, streaking by at incredible speed. Niverick's eyes were locked onto the screen, his gaze cold and focused. Meanwhile, Kozark began activating the ship's weapons, which extended from openings on the side of the craft. He couldn't help but grin slightly as he gripped his joystick, ready for what was to come. "Fire!" Kozark shouted, slamming the buttons with relentless force. Flashes of light erupted from the sides of the spacecraft in rapid succession. While not as powerful or as swift as the energized laser under Niverick's control, these projectiles were a perfect balance of strength and speed, serving well as a secondary weapon when the distance was short. The intensity of the flashes was blinding, filling Kozark's view with a brilliance that dilated his pupils. The rocks ahead exploded into thousands of fragments, each impact creating a spectacular display of constant, powerful bursts. They shattered in every direction, resembling a continuous fireworks show. Each rock was obliterated one after the other, clearing the path as they navigated deeper into the asteroid belt. The destruction only intensified as they pushed further into the belt, with rocks disintegrating faster and the spaces between them becoming smaller. It felt as if the ship was carving through the belt with raw, unstoppable force. "Ha ha ha ha!" Kozark laughed maniacally, his pupils fully dilated, tongue hanging over his sharp teeth in a twisted display of excitement. After tearing through the densest part of the asteroid field, a brief clearing appeared, and they finally caught sight of the Terran ship ahead. Without hesitation, Niverick tapped his touchpad, and the front of the alien ship began to glow as it charged up another laser blast. The beam shot across the void, leaving a streak of dissipating light in its wake. The Terran ship darted into another cluster of asteroids just as the laser grazed past, disintegrating a large portion of the floating rocks. Once again, the human ship faded behind the veil of debris. Niverick sighed, gripping his joystick tighter, and guided his ship into another dense asteroid field, chasing after it. Deep within the belt, now nearing its end, Niverick caught sight of the Terran ship's trail once more. This time, he began charging a far more powerful shot, gathering a massive amount of energy. The process was slower, with the ship's interior growing hotter as the power built up. All 3 crew members watched as the enormous sphere of energy formed on the screen, their pupils dilating in anticipation. The glowing orb was moments away from unleashing a devastating beam that would obliterate everything in its path. Just as the belt thinned and the Terran ship approached the edge, it instantly veered left, as if about to turn back on its course. Harrog frowned. He gave a command to zoom in on the image. The zoom brought the front of that spaceship into clear view on his display. Finally, he could see the human in high definition. However, something surprised him. The human's gaze seemed to stare back from a great distance, as if knowing they would be watching. It felt like more than just a human looking back at him, like it carried the weight of all humanity. The gaze appeared fragile, yet at the same time infinitely strong. It was something indescribable, only visible when one was close to death. A flash of light blinked brightly, so fast that it disappeared in less than a second. Suddenly, the human's ship began to fall. In that fraction of a second as it fell, a laser sliced through the space, as if the spacecraft had miraculously dodged it by pure chance. But it meant nothing. The ship spun wildly as if it had lost all control. "Why?" Harrog wondered, until he shouted, "The X-ray!" The screen turned into a negative color scheme for everyone, but only Harrog could see clearly with his enhanced vision on his part of the display. When he confirmed what he suspected, he was left speechless. There was no one inside anymore. The human disappeared. The ship kept spinning as they drew closer, watching it crash into the asteroids in a silent explosion. Nothing was left but debris. Niverick crossed the entire belt and then stopped. They looked back at the deadly maze of rocks through the display. Kozark was panting and leaned back in his chair, relaxing. Harrog had a disconnected look in his eyes. The chase had come to an end. Oliver Garcia, 1 minute before the encounter. "When I saw they were so close to catching me, I already knew I was dead. It didn't matter what I did. Nothing would work. It's a strangely agonizing feeling, knowing you've reached the end of the line. For a moment, I thought about everything I had done that day. Those few seconds felt so slow. What if I had just taken a different route? Is that an alien spacecraft? How fast it is. But I don't even know what to feel seeing that. I think I'm losing my balance. It feels like my ship is spinning, but it's not. Damn it! Am I going to die? It doesn't make sense. Like this? I swear if I could, I'd blow you all to pieces. Damn you! I'd crush you with my own hands, like giant hands crossing all this space. But I can't even feel them. It's so silent out here, and it's getting closer. I have no choice. I'll just press this damn button. So be it. Pressing this with all my strength makes me think that it might be the last thing I'll ever feel. I'm going to miss the solitude of my ship. Suddenly, everything went dark. I can't feel my body. Where am I? I can't see my feet, let alone my hands. Am I breathing? It doesn't even feel like I am. I don't feel any weight. Wait, everything is so blue. My God, did I make it? Everything around me changed so abruptly I could barely process it. Below me, I could only see a huge green blur, but all this wind around me is strangely satisfying to feel. But wait, am I going to die? If I fall, I'll die.
It's strange because if I'm here, it worked, and I could be anywhere. The chance of the teleport working precisely was minimal. Imagine suffocating somewhere in the middle of the vacuum of space. But I'm here. I'm here! What will George think when he finds out the teleport worked? The universe is so vast, who knows where I could have ended up, not even knowing where my end would be. And well, here I am, falling. When I covered my arms in front of me, the sound of the leaves rustling was intense. My knees hit the branches and my body started shaking. The blurs around me were a mix of blue and green. Feeling my back hit the ground was painful, even with all the grass. The speed of the fall had slowed down thanks to the trees. All of this is so improbable. It reminds me of how life exists on Earth. One small miscalculation, and it could all be fatal. I can't believe I'm alive. Honestly, I can't believe I'm here. I slowly opened my eyes. The brightness of the sun always bothered me, but now it brought me relief. I stayed on the ground for a few minutes, paralyzed and panting. I placed my hands on my knees and pushed myself up. As I looked around, I found myself surrounded by trees. I could hear the sound of some birds flapping their wings nearby. I checked my wrist and saw that I was still wearing my watch. Well, it was anything but a watch. After all, I couldn't care less about the time right now. I held it near my mouth and spoke, still slightly out of breath. "What's the distance from here to the base?" A voice responded. 7,000 kilometers. The funny thing was, it imitated a human so perfectly that I sometimes forgot it wasn't real at all. So, I'm not even in my own country. Damn it. I tapped what I needed on the watch's touchpad. Even though I was far away, it wouldn't take more than 20 minutes for them to pick me up. At least if they used a military ship, and they certainly will. They'll use it for much more than that. I guarantee they will. Coordinates of the previous point. Right ascension, RA, 3 hours, 32 minutes, 55.8 seconds. Declination, -9 degrees, 27 minutes, 29 seconds. I turned off the touchpad. I clenched my fists. All that was left was to file the report and wait.
The surveillance trio, 5 minutes after the encounter. They looked at the asteroid belt ahead of them and watched the ship's debris now drifting among the rocks. The explosion had been vast and cruel, but now all the excitement of the chase gave way to a meditative and somewhat strange silence. Niverick contemplated the desolation with his hands relaxed on the joystick, his chin raised in a haughty expression. Harrog didn't seem fully present. Kozark, in contrast, broke the brief silence with a small chuckle, recalling the images he had seen minutes earlier.
It wasn't that hard.
Those words stirred Harrog, who slowly turned his gaze toward Kozark.
It certainly will be.
Kozark raised his eyebrows. His face gradually grew tense. He knew Harrog well enough to sense there was some truth behind that response.
What do you mean, will be? It's all your fault. You should consider yourself dead from now on. All of us.
Kozark raised his voice, slamming his fist on the panel beside him.
My fault? What are you talking about, Harrog? Spit it out already!
Harrog lowered his gaze to the floor, though in that moment it wasn't the floor that occupied his mind.
The human survived.
Kozark stood up.
What do you mean he survived? Look at the wreckage!
Harrog shook his head.
He wasn't there anymore.
Niverick interrupted his contemplative gaze and turned his chair toward his colleague. The ship continued to glide smoothly with that rocky view ahead in the distance, painting a scene framed by the vibrant colors of countless galaxies. "Is that why the ship started falling so suddenly?" he asked, narrowing his eyes slightly.
"Yes,"
Harrog responded, now glancing more attentively around. He looked for his snacks in a nearby compartment and sighed upon finding none left.
"We need to head back. Our shift's long over. Besides, I'm getting hungry."
Kozark, still speaking loudly, said,
"Are you out of your mind?"
He took 2 steps forward.
Now we have to see this through.
Harrog scowled and stood up as well.
Didn't you hear what I said? We're dead. We didn't even have permission to do this. You act like you've completely forgotten our protocol. So what? If we're already dead, then what? We can still reverse the situation. At least we'll bring the crucial information that humans have now achieved teleportation.
Kozark's eyes widened.
That's impossible. You're talking nonsense. Only the Virkans have accomplished that so far, and we have no idea how. Now you're saying humans have figured it out? I didn't know you were into telling jokes, too.
Now it was Harrog who raised his voice.
It's not only possible, I saw it. You're nothing but a brute. That's going to be your downfall, and not just yours. You're dragging us down with you.
Kozark clenched his fists and slowly moved his arm toward his colleague. Niverick stood up and held him back.
He's right. We weren't even supposed to be here. Let's return and report the information. We can claim the humans attacked us first. Some kind of excuse. The Emperor will be pleased to hear something so important about the humans. He's a cautious man. If it's true, it opens a significant window for business. Who knows? We might even acquire teleportation technology ourselves.
Kozark growled.
And what if it doesn't work?
He then continued.
I don't remember a single instance where he showed mercy. He's cautious, but also demanding. The human vanished because he turned into pieces.
Niverick insisted.
We have no other choice but to try. Let's trust the Emperor.
I don't trust him.
Kozark turned his face and took a few steps towards the visor.
In fact, this is our chance.
Harrog shook his head and extended both arms toward his companion.
Chance for what? Let's just head back already. You don't trust him because you're not a native like us. He'll surely forgive us and be pleased about the teleportation discovery. Who knows? Together with the humans, we might even gain an advantage against the Virkans. But I know very well how war works,
Kozark said, now a little distant, his voice lowering.
What do you mean? Niverick asked.
We need to see this through. We've already attacked. If Harrog is right, the humans actually have enough technology to go to war without hesitation. They probably will. We need to be useful to the Emperor,
Harrog replied.
To the one who'll have our heads cut off. You yourself said we're already dead.
Kozark turned back to him.
So what do you propose? Why are you so insistent? We go to Earth. If we're going to die, let's die firing. And even if they have relevant technology like teleportation, they've always been far behind in military terms. This is just a minor technical obstacle. Our ship alone is enough to wipe out all life on Earth. But that doesn't make sense. If they've mastered teleportation,
Harrog said, scratching the side of his face.
Enough, Harrog!
Kozark sat down in his chair. Niverick also returned to his seat.
Let's try. I want to see just how good the humans can be,
he said, mentally revisiting the images from earlier, the Terran who had risked himself dangerously among the asteroids.
You're insane!
Harrog almost shouted, his glasses nearly falling to the floor.
You don't know what you're doing!
The trio's journey toward Earth began. Kozark harbored horrendous plans of launching a surprise attack, confident that the sheer strength of their ship alone would be enough to destroy the entire planet. This confidence stemmed from the fact that humans were known to be pacifists, and they hadn't even mastered light-speed travel, unlike many other civilizations. Therefore, it didn't make sense that they suddenly possessed something only the Virkans had mastered. The truth was, Kozark doubted humanity's progress greatly, while Niverick, the pilot, was obsessed with flying, having barely finished one mission before already craving more. Kozark disliked the Emperor because in truth he aspired to be one himself, and Earth could be the first planet he'd conquer. He couldn't understand why, despite knowing how weak humans were, no civilization had dared to simply colonize them. The Virkans merely forbade it with authority, and everyone obeyed without questioning the real reason. Unfortunately, the reason would soon be revealed in the worst possible way. As their ship journeyed through space, they received a message from Emperor Lasnor's planet, Zamus.
Where are you? It's been 2 hours since you disappeared from our orbit. Return immediately,
one of the commanders barked with a harsh tone. Harrog wiped the sweat from his forehead, remaining silent. Kozark answered the message, seeing the real-time image of one of their leaders displayed on his screen.
What happened, sir?
Kozark attempted to feign normalcy.
Someone violated the Verkan Convention. Someone poked the hive.
Poked the hive?
The image of the commander suddenly shifted to a view of the horizon of Zamus. Kozark's jaw dropped, while Niverick stared in disbelief. Harrog, upon seeing it, fainted. The entire planet was overrun with human ships. They couldn't even fathom how the humans had arrived. They didn't try to travel at light speed through acceleration. They had become so fast that they could literally disappear and reappear somewhere else. This was their faster-than-light method. It wasn't even possible to see them travel. Their teleportation worked so randomly that they would eventually hit the right spot, based purely on probabilities. This time, they had landed precisely where they needed to be on their first try. The commander's voice trembled as his station was finally breached.
The humans! They're everywhere!
The fleets of Zemus could barely handle the swarm. The transmission cut off amidst unexpected terror.
Verkans, you've stayed on top because of them, haven't you?
Kozark muttered aloud. The humans had never been pacifists. They were the true architects of war. Meanwhile, Niverick couldn't bring himself to believe it. He knew there'd been something different about that pilot. Something different hidden in that gaze.